Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to see so many enthusiastic people and to be part of this whole project. It's very cool. So my name is Hannah, and I'm originally from uh, Europe, from UK and France. I moved to Zimbabwe about just over 3 years ago now, to basically set up this rhino project and oversee a lot of community and conservation projects in this part of Zimbabwe. My background is mainly in environmental sciences and sustainable agriculture. So being on the ground and actually doing the work has been amazing and challenging, and I'm still learning lots. So really keen to hear what your thoughts are, and everyone who's experts in their fields, and yeah, get everyone's input in this project that we've started. So I'm gonna share my screen. Is that okay? So now I am on communal land in Western Zimbabwe, in the middle of the bush. I'm just a few meters away from the Hwange National Park boundary, and I've got my head torch here because there's not much light, and I'm worried we're going to run out of Wi-Fi, and I'm going to run out of battery, and the light's going to attract all the insects. So there's quite a few things that could go wrong, but just bear with me. I am just outside our operations room here, and so if you hear a bit of background noise or radio noise, don't be scared. It's just normal. And yeah, I'm really excited to introduce to you our Community Rhino Conservation Initiative and the work we're doing here. It's really aiming to bring rhino back to the Hwange ecosystem while at the same time benefiting the local communities. And it's an innovative project. Like I say, we're still learning a lot, and we're really keen to grow and partner with people who have their own experiences as well in this field. So just to contextualize a little bit, this is Zimbabwe, obviously in southern Africa, and Hwange National Park here is actually part of the Hwange Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, which links up 5 different countries. So in terms of a conservation area, it's of massive importance. And what we're specifically looking at today is the southern part of Hwange, this area here, and more specifically, this southern boundary here. So you've got the white area, that's the national park, and this whole blue area is the communal land, what we call communal land or public village land. So the plight of the southern white rhino is very well known. Some of you probably, as we heard, saw them in Hwange before they disappeared. But basically in the early 1900s, they were wiped out of Zimbabwe completely. And by the 1920s, they were at a very big threat of extinction within the whole of southern Africa. There was a very small population remaining in what is now KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And there was a huge amount of effort put into growing that population and growing it to a point where actually they were able to translocate rhinos and repopulate areas from which the rhinos had disappeared. So it was an amazing conservation effort. So in the 1970s, rhinos returned to Zimbabwe, returned to Hwange from that original population of 20 animals. And in the 1980s, you could see rhino herds in the open Hwange plains. You would be driving around and you just see rhino drinking, rhino walking around. It was a very common sight. Nowadays, it's not so common. And then in the 80s, all of a sudden there was a big increase in poaching, and people were very underprepared for it. Unfortunately, it was so bad that people refer to it as the Rhino Wars. A lot of poachers died, but also a lot of rangers died, and obviously a lot of rhinos died. And the last rhino in southern Hwange, at least, was seen in the early 2000s. So it was an awful time. You had international gangs from all over Africa coming to poach rhino for their horns, and it was just terrible. It saw the end of the rhinos in Hwange. So This next picture is of a white rhino that was poached around the 1990s. This gentleman here is the boss and mastermind behind this Community Rhino Conservation Initiative. His name is Mr. Mark Butcher. And for those of you who know him, you might recognize him from his shoes, because he apparently is still wearing the same Converse shoes 30 years later. And unfortunately, he couldn't commit to giving this presentation tonight, but he, as a great conservationist, and as many of them, it wasn't ever a question of whether or not we should try and bring rhino back to Hwange. It was a question of how do we do it? How do we do it in a way that's sustainable? How do we do it in a way that has learned from our mistakes of the past? And how can we learn from neighbors? So that was really kind of the start of okay, how do we get rhino back here? And it was clear that the park hadn't been able to protect them. The park was just too vast, and they were at threat inside the park. So the other option, and slightly ludicrous option, was, okay, well, could we put them on communal land bordering the park? And it was slightly crazy, but it's the same ecosystem, it's the same habitat, it's just a different authority, and it's land that's been allocated for a different purpose. But potentially it could work. So that was the start of that idea. So just moving on to this map here, if you can see this faint line, hopefully, that's basically the national park boundary. You've got a very famous railway line here, going from Bulawayo to Big Falls, and everything to the north and west of this park fence is the national park, and everything to the southeast is communal land, village land. And you can see here these yellow areas, those are all homesteads and households. So these are all people living. And these are the people who actually live with wildlife. So some of them you'll notice are very close to the park boundary, so a few meters, a few kilometers, and some of them are a little bit further back. But basically, this park fence is just a vet fence. In some areas, there's no fence left because people have stolen the cabling. In some areas, the elephants have destroyed the fence. But it was built to just stop, it was erected to just stop buffalo crossing over, mixing with the cattle and spreading disease. So elephants and predators, lions, hyenas, it's very easy for them to cross the fence and enter from the park into the communal land. So human-wildlife conflict in this area is a massive problem. These people they're very poor, they're very rural, they're very remote, they don't have access to job opportunities, to social services. So they rely on the food they grow. They're subsistence farmers. So when an elephant crosses over, or a herd of elephants, and destroys their crops or kills their cattle, it's a massive problem. It's a life-threatening deal for them. So they don't see wildlife as a positive thing at all. On the other side, we have tourists coming from all over the world on safari, taking photos of this wildlife and seeing it as a magical thing. So this contrast is really big. So the idea was, okay, we want to bring rhino on communal land, but how are we going to convince these local people to give up some of their precious cattle grazing land for rhino, for wildlife? Because they don't see it as a positive thing. And luckily, a local safari operator in Velo Safari Lodges had over the last few years, it's been building up a very good relationship with the local communities. And it's been, without necessarily doing it on purpose, gathering all the ingredients necessary to actually engage the locals in conservation and give them the opportunity to say, yes, we want to allocate some of our land to rhino. And they've been doing this several ways. The main way is they've actually been hiring local people. They haven't been hiring skilled, trained personnel from the capital cities. They've been hiring from the local village a few kilometers away from the lodges. So they've been hiring people who are poor, sometimes uneducated, sometimes illiterate, sometimes they can't speak English. They've been training them up, and they've been giving people opportunities that there's no other jobs here. So again, really life-changing. They've gone and done recruitment drives in the schools, inspired kids to become guides, to become scouts, work in the lodges. And in fact, most of the guides that work for Mvelo Safari Lodges are all local. They all went to the local primary and secondary schools. So that was a big thing. That was one of the main ways that the company could actually engage the locals directly in tourism and therefore in conservation as well. Another big thing they did and they continue to do, and a big part of my job is doing this, is basically helping the communities with their development, socio-economic development, well-being. So a lot of focus is on drilling boreholes, providing people with food, facilitating education, and promoting healthcare as well. So, for example, this picture is in one of the local villages. This is a village drill that is drilling a borehole. These areas are very, very dry, and there's very little natural surface water. And boreholes, you know, things can go wrong, things can break, they can dry up. So sometimes villages go a very long time without having access to water, and it's a big problem. It's you know, it's you can't live without water. So being able to drill boreholes for people has had a huge impact on the local communities. This photo is of a few girls carrying water, so it's often the women who are in charge of fetching water. So obviously if the nearest borehole isn't working and isn't pumping, then the women might spend, you know, 5, 6, 7 hours a day just going to fetch water. They get the younger girls to help them, so those younger girls don't attend school. So water from a cultural and kind of social point of view is also very important. And obviously having access to water allows people to have better access to food. So we're helping, Mvelo is helping with food security in terms of giving food aid, but also helping with irrigated plots, school lunches, food rations, anything that helps people with food security in the area. Then this next slide is of one of the classroom blocks that we finished building in May this year in one of the more rural, they're all rural, but even more rural villages further away from the tourist lodges. And this was built with a massive donation by a very generous American lady. But basically, Mvelo over the years has done a lot in terms of school infrastructure. So building classrooms, building teacher cottages, putting water, so drilling boreholes and setting up vegetable gardens around those boreholes, giving solar power to the schools, supplying furniture, supplying stationery, a massive textbook distribution program as well. So helping teachers, school bursaries, a huge amount of work and effort put into the schools, just to help the kids be inspired and give them a chance to do well. And then this last slide is of our annual Smile and See program. So this is when we have dentists from Spain come voluntarily and we take them to very remote villages, and we gather villagers from even further away, and they provide dental and eye care. So for villagers who haven't seen a dentist, you know, probably in their whole life, having someone remove those teeth that hurt or give them glasses and allowing them to see is, again, massively life-changing. And we're actually doing this program this year. We're running it next year, next week. And last year, at the end of last year, we treated over 31,000 patients over 10 years. So yeah, a huge demand for healthcare in the area. Again, people live very remotely. They don't have access to, you know, healthcare. So having healthcare come to them is amazing. And then we've also built a local clinic called Ngamo Clinic, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. And then this map is really just to show the scale and extent of some of the development work that Mvelo Safari Lodges has kind of prompted. A lot of it has been done with a very big network of donors, but that's basically been brought in through tourism. So it just goes to show the value of tourism in terms of how tourism revenue can help development, but also how tourism can bring people who then bring money for more development projects, and also bring a lot of partnerships. A lot of tourists that come have a lot of contacts and are able to provide very important partnerships that allow us to do a lot of amazing work in this area. So, for example, at the moment we're drilling a borehole in Hwange village, which is all the way down here. And part of the problem with this is that these don't necessarily understand that that's from tourism, and they definitely don't understand that tourism is from wildlife conservation. So they don't necessarily link the fact that these development opportunities are coming from tourism and therefore from wildlife. So some of the villages that are closest to the Mvelo Safari Lodges, so these ones, Mvelo Safari Lodges are here and here. There's another lodge here and then one further up north. They more readily understand the value of wildlife. And that's because Mvelo has been hiring people. So people are going home with a paycheck at the end of every month, and people are understanding, okay, tourism can bring money, and so wildlife can bring tourists, so wildlife is good. But also because Mvelo brings tourists to these villages, they go and see the school, they go and they might go for walks inside the village, they might go and buy some locally made crafts, they go to the school and they speak English and they inspire the kids. So there's a real exchange, and people can more directly see the tourist and feel the benefits of tourism. So one of the ideas was, okay, so if we're going to put rhino on communal land, we need to do it somewhere where the villagers are willing to give up some of their precious grazing land for rhino. So it made a lot of sense to do it right here, because these communities were already kind of embedded within wildlife conservation through tourism. And that's when this whole idea kind of came to life, when we started having the conversations with these communities and getting their endorsement and getting them to say, okay, yeah, let's go for it. And at the time, this was about 5 years ago, at the time that this idea was kind of coming to life, Mvelo was also fundraising for the Ngamo Clinic, a local clinic to be built. And there was this kind of crazy thought that, okay, well, could the rhinos bring enough tourism to actually fund the Ngamo Clinic? And yeah, we'll come back to that later. But it was, you know, at the time, it was kind of a crazy thought, which we've managed to come to reality. So the managing director, Mr. Mark Butcher, went off and started to talk very seriously about this project with people. He spoke to national parks, to the rural district council. Everyone thought it was a pretty crazy idea to have rhino introduced onto communal land. But he persisted, and he also spoke to the Language Trust, who operate in the southeastern part of the country down here. They're a private game reserve, and they have done exceedingly well at both protecting and breeding rhino. And they also thought it was a crazy idea to reintroduce rhino on communal land. But they also said, if you're going to go and give it a good try, then you need to make sure protection is what you're doing, and that you're really keeping these rhino very safe. And that's when we decided, okay, so we're going to aim for having just a very few number of rhino in a very small area with a huge number of scouts. And that was to be our starting point. And so we went off what we called our Cobras Community Wildlife Protection Unit. And this is a photo of our first recruitment in 2018. So we went to the local villages, told the villagers what we were doing, and lots of people came, said they wanted to join. And then we ran a 3-week recruitment process, and that kind of stripped out all the people that weren't quite so keen and probably weren't quite so tough enough, because it's a very, very difficult process, very physically demanding, as you can see from this photo. And it really tests people kind of stamina and determination and their willingness to take on the job. And then we've had basically about 18 scouts from that first recruitment drive, and they moved on to basic training, and there they learned how to shoot. So bearing in mind, some of these were local villagers who'd never, left the village, who had obviously never held a gun. So teaching them how to shoot, but also teaching them about first aid, about radio communications, about environmental education, awareness, human-wildlife conflict resolution, problem animal control, a whole heap of skills that they had to learn during this basic training. They also had to learn how to drill to help improve their focus, their teamwork, their attention to detail, and that's something they still do. And they were basically trained to British military standards. That was what we were aiming for. And then we also had to put up the needed infrastructure. So this was putting up a fencing off this piece of land that the communities had basically allocated to rhino. So this was a huge step when we actually put up a fence and said, okay, this piece of land is not for the villagers' cattle anymore, it's for the villagers' rhino. That was a huge shift in kind of the local attitudes. A really big day. And all this was basically going on during COVID. So it was very difficult getting supplies, logistics were very difficult, and of course there was no tourism income at all. But we managed to fence off the area. We managed to build a camp. We had built a training camp, but we built a proper camp with solar power, with water, with barracks, with an operations room where I am now. And we did 2 more recruitments, so another one in 2019 and then another one in 2021. We also built the larger sanctuary area, and then inside that we also built a smaller fenced area, which we called a boma, the habituation boma, which would be where the rhino would first arrive and be safest, because it's obviously a smaller area. And then this next photo is just to show the extent to which we were ready to welcome rhino. So obviously this photo is a bit set up, but hopefully you get the idea. So we had local donkeys come in and pretend they were rhino, and our Cobra's scouts had to protect them 24/7. So yeah, we were basically ready. We were, our scouts were ready to tackle heavily armed poachers. We had the infrastructure in place, and we were ready. Another thing we had was obviously we developed a master plan, because so far what we were focusing on was a tiny area and a tiny number of rhino. What we wanted was a massive conservation ambition. So we had already also co-designed with the communities and with input from our partners, including the Malulangwe Trust, including parks, an actual conservation project that would allow for an eventual free-ranging rhino population. And the way we did this is we split up the Community Rhino Conservation Initiative into 4 phases. So the first phase is the one we're currently in. So we've got a small sanctuary on communal land bordering the national park here. And it's small number of rhino, huge number of scouts, really protected rhino, really safe. Phase 2, which we have just started, is building another sanctuary further down along the Hwange Park boundary. Bigger, more rhino, again, more scouts, another base, and slightly different habitat as well. And the idea of having 1 sanctuary and 2 sanctuaries, different phases, is because Sanctuary 1 could serve as a pilot project, as a bit of a proof of concept to say, okay, we can protect rhino, we can do it really well, and these rhino are also bringing in revenue for the local communities. And that would help inspire other communities to give up some of their land for a rhino as well. So phase 2 continues with more sanctuaries getting placed along the boundary. And these sanctuaries obviously have to be completely co-designed with the communities. So what part of land needs to be cleared, how big, exactly where, that's all kind of being done slowly and steadily with the communities as we progress. Then phase 3 is where it gets really interesting. We combine all these sanctuaries along the boundary and we create this one thin, long conservancy. And from a protection point of view, this is obviously less than ideal because it's a very difficult thing to protect. But actually, if we think back at the geography, this is actually probably the best idea. And the reason being is because all of a sudden along this boundary, we have rhinos, we have scouts, And we have now an electrified fence, which means that the elephants and predators that used to come over from the park into communal land no longer can, or at least it's incredibly harder for them to. So we're reducing human-wildlife conflict completely in this area. And that, again, that is life-changing for these very vulnerable people. And then the last phase is a bit of a dream at the moment, but obviously it's to bring rhino back into the park and have a completely free-ranging population within the park. We'll see how that pans out. But basically, we had the master plan, the conservation master plan. We had our first sanctuary set up. We had a very capable unit ready. All we were actually missing were rhinos. So finally, we got the Malilangwe Trust to agree to send us up some rhinos. They came and did some ecological assessments on the area. They came and viewed our scouts, and they were happy to send some rhinos up to us. And in May 2022, we finally got our rhinos. So these are our rhinos. The one at the front is Tusa, the bigger one, and the one at the back is Kusasa. And the process to get them up to us from Malilangwe, which is obviously on the other side of the country, was not so easy. The Malilangwe Trust guys are complete experts in the field, and massive beetle. No one could have done it better than them. But it was hard and it was challenging. So they had identified the 2 rhino they wanted to send up to us. And they had a few criteria. They wanted the rhino to be 2 youngish males with a relatively long reproductive career ahead of them. They wanted them to be friends, but not related maternally. And they wanted them to live kind of on the perimeter of their game reserve. And they came up with rhinos number 803 and rhino number 204, which we then renamed. And basically what happened is the scouts and monitoring team were sent out. They found the rhinos, they identified them. Then the vets and the parks team swooped in. They darted them squarely on the rump and with a cocktail of tranquilizers. So the rhinos were subdued. They were then blindfolded, roped. They were sprayed with cool water, oxygenated, and their temperature and respiration were monitored. This was all done extremely professionally by the Malilangwe team. They were also dehorned for several different reasons. One of them is because it's a bit dangerous for them to have their fully grown horns in the crates that they were going to be transported in to get to us. And also because we wanted to put a radio transmitter inside the horn. So we dehorned them, put a radio transmitter in. And then they were taken to what we call bomas, little fenced areas, where they were kept for 2 weeks. So I think this one is Kusasa in his boma, and there they were monitored, just checked they were doing okay, they weren't too stressed, and they were getting ready for a massive road trip across the country. So finally they came to us. They left the Malilangwe Reserve on the 21st of May. They had a 17-hour road trip. These are the crates they traveled in. And they traveled over 750 kilometers. It was a 22 vehicle convoy. There were vets, national park representatives, rural district councillors, scouts, the ecologists from Malilangwe. We had traditional leaders. There was a huge number of people. And then as you can see from this image, there were also a huge number of villagers waiting for the convoy and waiting for the rhinos to arrive. And finally, they arrived through the sanctuary gate into our first sanctuary, and they were released into our smaller boma within the sanctuary, the habituation boma. So this is inside that boma. You can see the fence here at the back. And the first few days, we all had to be very quiet. Vehicles had to be very quiet. And they were very sensitive to noise, to smells, to anything moving too quickly. And it took them a little while to kind of calm down and settle in. They had a lot to get used to. And one thing they also had to get used to was the weather. it was a lot cooler in Hwange than it had been in Malelangwe. So that kind of shocked their system a little bit. And we had to supplementary feed them. So this is some of our scouts laying out some lucerne and some grass for the rhino, and the rhino just waiting for their breakfast to be served. But they, slowly but surely, they got more and more used to the scouts, especially, and to the noises. And soon enough, they were walking outside, leaving their habituation boma. So this is just seconds before they left. And as soon as they did that, they ran around the whole sanctuary, discovering all its corners, and just settling in again into their new home. And the scouts, obviously, they had to follow them. So 24/7, they have to be with the rhino. So the first few days when the rhino were kind of quickly running around, the scouts, got a lot of exercise. And then this photo is our scouts guarding these rhino. It was a lot for the rhino to get used to, but it was also quite intense for our scouts to get used to it, because they'd been training for 2 or 3 years. But obviously when you have a huge, animal like the rhino in front of you, it's slightly different. So it also took them a little bit of time to get completely comfortable. They speak to the rhino. They've created a very important relationship with these rhino. And there's a very strong level of trust now, but it obviously came with a bit of time. These rhino were completely wild when they came to us. So, them smelling people and seeing people wasn't something they were used to. So the guards, not only they guard 24/7, but they also monitor behavior, and they record behavior as well. So we're keeping track of, any injuries, body condition, and making sure that the rhinos are in tip-top form. And then, of course, we had our first tourists. So through Imvelo Safari Lodges, we had the first tourists come and see the rhino. And it's a great opportunity for tourists to see the Big Five in Hwange, or near Hwange. And we have the opportunity to walk with rhino as well. The rhino have become quite inquisitive, especially the bigger one, Tusa. So he'll actually often smell tourists and then come kind of walking over to see what's going on. But people can find out a lot more about the project. They can hear from the scouts, and they, tourists get fantastic experience with these animals, which is great. Another thing we do is we obviously bring the local school children up. So we've brought over 450, or just about 450 school children to see the rhino so far. They talk to the scouts, they listen to the scouts, they do press up with the scouts, they draw a rhino. Obviously they go and walk with the rhino, or watch the rhino from the vehicles. But it's a great way of getting them enthusiastic, of inspiring them. And by the end of their couple of hours with us here, they all want to become cobras, which is great. It's really nice for them to just get to know their neighbors a little bit more. And then obviously community members as well. We've been talking about this project for so long that actually bringing the rhino and having people coming to see the rhino and understand what the rhino are, and how impressive they are is a great. And we've always getting requests for people to just come and see the rhino. So that's been really exciting as well. And obviously the rhino, they've settled in very well into their new home. So this is actually where I'm sat right now, in the dark. But the rhino come here routinely. They come say hello. This is one of them trying to join in one of our meetings. But they've properly made it their home, which is really nice to see. And then this photo is slightly different, but actually this is a photo that represents the culmination of the impact of the rhinos so far. So this is our local Ngamo clinic that I mentioned earlier. We started fundraising for it in 2017, and it was completely reliant on donations, which can be a bit erratic. You never really know when someone's going to donate or how much. So we only actually finished building it in 2022, thanks to donors. And in September, on September the 15th, it welcomed its very first patient, which is this lady on the photograph. She'd been stung by a scorpion. And what's been amazing is that actually now the clinic is open. We still need a lot more funds for the infrastructure. We haven't actually finished building the actual clinic. We've built it to a point where it's operational and it can welcome patients. But so we still need donor funds, but actually the rhino fees, the revenue generated from tourists coming to see the rhino, which are going to the communities, are being used to maintain this clinic, to pay the nurse's salary, to pay the security guard salary, and to pay for top-ups on drugs and medicine. So all of a sudden you have these 2 rhino on communal land being guarded by local scouts, all from the local villages, and the money that those rhinos are generating is being used to maintain the local clinic open and operational. So that's really exciting. It's quite a new way of funding development and of really engaging people as well in their own development. And so now what we're doing is we're currently starting our phase 2. So we're starting our second sanctuary. We've gotten the agreements in place with the communities. We have demarcated the area. We're clearing land, starting to fence, and currently we're also undergoing a 4th recruitment. We started last week with about 48 young men, again, all from the local communities. I think as of tonight, there's only about 19 left because it's such a difficult process to become a scout. But yeah, so we are moving forward with our second sanctuary, which is really exciting. And then this little diagram is just to briefly demonstrate basically this idea of wildlife and local communities not being at conflict, but actually being able to kind of reinforce each other as well as tourism. So all of a sudden you have tourists that are coming, they're paying to see the rhino, but they're getting an amazing wildlife experience. They're able to see the Big 5 in Hwange. This project is helping the local community, so they're also happy because they're getting money from the rhinos, they're getting jobs from the rhinos, they're getting their kids supported by the rhinos, and then obviously wildlife is also happy because you've also got funds and the capacity to actually bring rhino back and ensure wildlife conservation. And then added to this, sorry, so many insects. Added to this, of course, are other opportunities like research and volunteering, and there's a whole heap of other opportunities in terms of what we could do in this kind of local context. And then this last slide is actually just to kind of remind us that our ultimate goal is obviously a breeding population of rhino. And this is a photo taken at Malilangwe, and they have really set the example and the standards for us, and in terms of what we want to do and what we want to achieve. And they've been amazing partners to have. And yeah, we're keen to keep growing our conservation project slowly and steadily with the communities, but to keep moving in that direction. And that's about it from me. I'm sure there's a few questions. I'm sure there's a few things I skipped, but that's yeah, that's basically all I had.
Wonderful. And then I'm going to open up the floor, or the screen as it were, for questions and answers. And if you do have any questions, please just use the reaction tools, or you can put them in the chat section. And I'm going to start off with the chat section, and we have Patricia Stachman, who asks, what size was the initial sanctuary?
So the first sanctuary, which I'm in now, I'm at the headquarters now, is about 180 hectares. So it's quite small. And initially we had thought of bringing in 3 rhinos, but after doing a assessment of the kind of carrying capacity, we realized having only 2 rhinos was better, just given the unpredictability of the rains and things like that. So it's quite small, but yeah, it's big enough.
Cool, thank you, Patricia. And then another question from Patricia, whilst I'm waiting for the audience to warm up. When do you hope to get a cow? Will you continue to dehorn, or was this just for relocation? 2 questions there.
So the dehorning thing is quite an interesting debate. So obviously dehorning in our case made sense for the translocation. It also made sense for us to put the transmitters in. Also, the area we're in, we've got a fence, and actually the horn could have been a bit problematic with that fence as well. And then a last reason for the dehorning was that actually there's this idea that if you dehorn, then you're decentivizing poachers from coming. Not sure if that's really true or not, but that's one of the ideas. The horns are growing back quite quickly, actually. If you see our photos, the horns are not so short. And I'm not entirely sure what we'll do moving forward, if we'll keep dehorning them or not. I think we'll have to consult experts and see what they say. And I'm not too sure with a cow either what we'll do. We're very much learning as we go.
Thank you very much. Well, the audience is very quiet, but the chat section is incredibly busy. 2 more questions, one from Ron. Ron's asking, oops, there we go. How do you rewild the rhinos at the final stage? Are you introducing them into the national park?
Very good question. I'm not quite sure. I think, as I say, we've been kind of learning how we go. We didn't really know how we would not de-wild them, but kind of get them used to humans. It's been quite a slow process to see how they could get used to the scouts and how they could get used to tourists. In terms of kind of rewilding them, I'm not sure either. Very open to suggestions, but yeah, that's not just yet. It's taken us a while to get to where we are now. So yeah, and obviously one of the things we're very conscious of is if we had a cow introduced now to this sanctuary with our 2 current male rhinos, there would be a huge problem. You know, the male rhinos would kill each other. So we appreciate this isn't quite the natural setting they would find themselves in, but it's a step to get us there.
Completely agree. Thank you very much, Hannah. And then again, as the audience is all quiet on the screen, I'm going to continue on with the chat section. From Lucy Chimes, how do the transmitters work in the horns? Are they satellite transmitters?
So yes, so they're just we don't actually use them that often. We're just kind of playing around with the technology. So we've just got an antenna and a receiver, and we can just point it in the direction and have an idea of how far they are in that direction. It's it's quite basic technology. Technology is something that we are looking more and more into. At the moment, because we have so many scouts and kind of feet on the ground, and we have such a small area, having the high-tech stuff isn't necessarily so important. As we grow in area and grow in number of rhinos, having high-tech GPS devices and cameras and all that sort of stuff will become more important. So we're experimenting just mainly to get our scouts to get used to it, but it's not something we actually rely on, just because right now I could go and radio the scout and find out exactly where the rhino are, because they're being guarded 24/7.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And just because I am allowed to, and I know her very well, I'm going to ask Cheryl Ogilvie to unmute herself and ask her question, please. Otherwise, it's only me and Hannah on the screen this evening. Cheryl, the screen's all yours.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you. What you're doing is very similar to what I'm doing down in Indumu. We're working with school learners. We're trying to make them aware, trying to change perceptions, trying to change behavior, and that's difficult. Have you done any evaluation to show change, if there is any change? Because many, when you start looking for funders, a lot of the funders want to see data. And I know that is a schlep, but it's a must. So have you done anything like a before and after questionnaire to see if there is change happening amongst the learners and the community members? I know with the community members, you're probably also dealing with illiteracy. So you'll probably have to physically do the focus groups and the interviews with them to try and find out if there's any change.
That's a great question. And it's actually, I'd be keen to hear what you do with that. We obviously know exactly what we do in terms of impact. How that carries through into long-term impact is always a very good question. So, for example, we've distributed over 68,000 textbooks to over 100 schools in the area. How much that's impacted the actual learning and the teachers teaching is a different, it's an entirely different question. What I can say, I guess it's not hardcore data, but we do have a lot of very positive stories. The local primary school here, 10 years ago looked very different. The kids were learning under trees. The kids didn't speak any English, were scared of foreigners. The primary school, especially the local primary school now, is creating, they had their first woman to go to a Californian university this year, which is, for a very rural village in Zimbabwe it's extraordinary. And actually, again, that's thanks to tourism. She got a sponsorship through tourism. So the numbers I don't quite have, but we know pass rates, we know the number of girls that are attending university and things like that. That's basically, and the other problem we have is that we work with some schools that are a lot further away, and it's a lot harder to kind of see how they evolve. But one of the big things we do is actually provide school bursaries, and that, a lot of these kids don't even attend school if their parents can't afford it, or if they've got other jobs to do at home, including girls fetching water. So us giving them a chance to stay in school, feeding them at school, that alone is a huge win. But I'd be keen to hear how you kind of record impact.
Hannah, we're doing very similar stuff, and my project's been running for 23 years. I'm working in 21 schools, and we work with grade 3s, 7s, and 8s. So we are getting some impact now, but it took a long time to get it off the ground, and we had to keep adjusting the programs, but it was due to the evaluation. So I'll sit with you and I'll discuss with you what I've done. It may not work for you, but you can adapt it. You're in a different area, you've got different objectives as well, but the way you spoke is what I was dealing with as well, and still am. The young girls fetch water, they miss school. If they do go to school, they're late for school because they've got to first go and get water. They've got to fetch firewood. So I'm dealing with a lot of environmental impacts. So we'll have a chat. I'll get your details from Ruan or Johan, and we'll email, and who knows, maybe you can come out to Nduma and see what we are doing, and I'll come out to you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Lovely what this is all about, teamwork. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And then I'm going to unmute Ron. Ron's asking, Ron, you have an announcement to make. You can just...
can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Very impressive story from Hannah. I was just checking our bank account. There's a very small foundation that I created. I'm making a Safari newsletter due to the COVID time, with copy, cut, paste, all kinds of information, and the people pledge a small amount, 50 euros a year. And I'm just checking the balance, and the foundation name is Sun, Save Our Unspilled Nature. And I was a little bit surprised. It was too much positive on the balance, and the money should not go stay on the account. And I think 1 hour, Hannah, I like to honor that, like the hour wage of a lawyer. So after this meeting, we will pledge, and when I get the bank details, we will pledge $500. Bear in mind, we have only 2,000 on the account. So for us, it is a huge amount, but a small step for the rhinos.
Wonderful.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's amazing.
Yeah, you're welcome. 1 hour. You don't waste your time, you know, Hannah.
I see Marty's hand is up. Fantastic. Marty, I was waiting for you to ask a question. Please unmute.
I was also waiting for me to ask a question. Thanks, Hannah, for the chat. I hope I didn't miss one part of the things. I hope my question isn't one that was answered. But who actually owns these rhinos that you are sort of placing in the perimeter boundary of Hwange? And is there a sense of ownership and beyond a sense of ownership? You know, for example, you mentioned dehorning and whatever the case is. Are the community able to in some way benefit from their relationship on that? And, you know, when the rhinos are finally released, I think that's a step that's still going to happen into Hwange. Are the communities kind of going to feel in some way aggrieved that, you know, the rhino that they've been looking after for a period of time is actually going away? I'm just gonna just asking the question. I hope it wasn't answered along the talk. I don't think it was.
No. That's the ownership, custodianship question is a really good one. These rhino actually, all the wildlife belongs basically to the national parks. It's national heritage, but these rhino came to us and were kind of handed over to us by Malilangwe Trust. But the idea is if we prove or if we disprove that we can protect them, if we show that actually we're not worthy of being able to protect them, then they would actually go back to Malilangwe. So Malilangwe are kind of entrusting us with this, with the, you know, anything can go wrong. Yeah. And if something does go wrong, actually, we will send them back to Malilangwe. That's kind of the agreement we had. So almost like a lease. In terms of the community ownership, so obviously they don't own the rhino, but there is this sense of custodianship. Like I say, all of the scouts are from the local villages. They literally are the ones looking after the rhino, you know, making sure the rhino are healthy and safe. And they're also the ones that are benefiting from the rhino from jobs, but also their kind of homes and their villages are benefiting from revenue generated from the rhino. So there's that kind of direct sense of custodianship. The kind of communities feeling like they are responsible for the rhino and that that's, I think, going to come a bit with time. I think that's one of the reasons we're focusing quite a bit on children, to get them really excited by the rhino and knowing the rhino and knowing about the rhino. But yeah, it's I think that's gonna, yeah, it's a slightly, I guess, it's more of a behavior attitude thing than a concrete, you know, whether or not they own the rhino. And then when the rhino are returned into the park, I think we'll have to see how that is kind of framed, because at the moment, the way we frame it is tourists go inside the national park, they pay a national park entrance fee. When they come see the rhino on communal land, they pay a conservancy and a community gate fee. And that gate fee goes straight to the communities for them to spend however they want. So it's, yeah, once the rhino are in the park, it's going to be a slightly different setup. But hopefully by then the project will be completely entrenched within the communities and a huge part of the development opportunities anyway. Okay. But yeah, it's a good question, difficult question.
No, thanks. And then just sort of further to that, there been opportunities for any rhino orphans to be introduced to these same areas, because you know, in South Africa, there's actually quite a few rhino orphanages, and I'm not too sure whether they are always able to be reintroduced into the wild directly. Maybe this is another opportunity, another place. So it's something just maybe to explore. And
I would love a baby rhino.
No, great. And then just the last question in terms of the costs. You know, a lot of these rhinos do need sort of veterinary intervention from time to time, and who picks up those costs? I mean, obviously the community probably wouldn't be able to, as much as they might benefit for some things, they can't cover any of those costs. So is that still the national park's responsibility?
No, so that's the project's responsibility. So we've got a vet based in Victoria Falls, Dr. Hwange, who's extremely good. And he's been kind of, we literally message him. Sorry, there's so many bugs. We literally message him every day with updates on the rhinos. And he's kind of our go-to person on that. We're still also in touch with the Malangui team. Again, every day, and so that's really important. Sorry, I forgot your question. I just got distracted by
just the cost of the veterinary bills and all that stuff. Who picked up that?
When the business model is when tourists come to see the rhino, they pay a fee. Part of that fee goes straight to the communities, to a trust that they have, and they can spend it on whatever community needs they have. So, like I said, at the moment, some of that funding is going to the actual local clinic. Yep. And then the other part of the funds that the tourists pay go to maintaining the project and expanding the project. So yeah, it's everything is contained. We're funding everything, which is difficult, but not impossible.
No, keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Marty. Gary and Dr. Akbula, I see your hands up. I would just like to alternate to the questions in the chat as well. A question from Lucy, a practical question. Why did you decide to get the rhinos so used to humans in the first place, rather than keeping them more off a distance and not being on foot near them, etc.?
So the main reason was for protection. So I think everyone in Zimbabwe, I don't know about South Africa, but everyone here is very, very scared. As soon as you have rhino, it becomes a massive liability. So protection is the main thing. We want our scouts to be as close to the rhino as they can, far enough so they can see everything around them, but close enough that if there's a problem, they're literally there. So the main reason is the protection. And you can see the rhinos, they're very used to the scouts. They're less used to tourists. I think maybe the smells are different. They're less used to, for example, female voices and things like that. So yeah, the main reason was really for the protection. Okay. When in our further sanctuaries, we might have fewer tourism interactions. But they'll still need to be able to be close to humans for that protection.
Practical question with a practical answer. Gary, your question, please.
Hi, everybody. Hannah, wonderful presentation. I actually was born in Zimbabwe. I've lived in Canada for 40 years, so I'm sitting here in Tranter today. And a couple of years ago, came with my daughter to that very area of Hwange, and it was absolutely wonderful. What's the experience with rhinos, their breeding capacity? Is there a big enough core in the country to actually develop a sustainable ongoing population?
You mean in where we are in Hwange?
In anywhere, like Malilangwe seems to have been quite successful. But like, do they
almost
produce
too successful?
Year? Do they produce a lot? Is there enough of a gene pool?
So there's definitely enough of a gene pool. I obviously can't say too much about their population because I don't know, and because it's not information they willingly share. But I can tell you that they have enough to be sending them to Hwange. So yeah, they've done exceptionally well. They've just know exactly what they're doing in terms of protection and in terms of the habitat management and things like that. So yeah, I mean, like I said, their ecologists came here, they did an assessment, and they're the ones who said, listen, for this area, it's safer to get only 2 rhinos And then that way, if you have a poor rainy season, then you still have enough to sustain them. So they really know what they're doing from that point of view, and they wouldn't have kind of partnered with us on this project if they didn't think this had the potential to accommodate a proper population, I think.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Dr. Akbula, please go ahead and ask your question.
Well, very nice presentation there. And I'm impressed with the level of work that's been put into it. My little concern has been addressed, the overhabitation of the rhinos, first of all. And then I'm a bit worried about the level of militancy going into the population, because you have so many people you're training to use guns. And if a situation happens that tourism dollars doesn't come into that kind of area, you've already armed people who, you know what happens, the banditry. So do you have a backup plan? Peradventure, tourism dollars drop. We had COVID, and we saw how it devastated some areas. So that's just my own question.
That's a very good question. So obviously COVID was a big reality check for a lot of industries, especially tourism, and the fact that so much community development relied on tourism. So we are trying to kind of have a bit of a varied income into the project. So we've got some loans, we've got some donors, we've got very, very generous donors, and then we've got tourism. So it is also just a charitable project that people donate towards. And in fact, most of the money we've spent so far has been without tourism, because there was no tourism during COVID. And we've managed to keep the unit, which the scouts, the boots on the ground, which is the most important thing. But yeah, you make a very good point about that. The other point you made about the rhinos becoming too familiar and too kind of, I guess, tame. I wouldn't say they're tame at all. I think they've properly settled into their habitat, and I think they've made this their home. They're very impressive, and I can tell you the scouts are very cautious around them, but there is that level of understanding that it's a shared habitat, and that there's going to be people and there's going to be rhinos. So yeah, and we will see how things go in the next sanctuary, where we'll have more rhinos and we'll have a bigger area. At the moment, the scouts know these rhinos so well because they're with them all the time. But when we have more rhinos, more scouts, that relationship will probably change a little bit as well, I'm assuming.
Thank you, Dr. Akbula, for the question. A question from Patricia. Patricia, if you're still here, if you want to unmute yourself and ask it or react, you've got a question in the chat going, in the areas further from tourist areas, do you anticipate that the schools and the clinics and the boreholes will be sufficient without tourist jobs? In other words, to maintain that positive attitude towards the rhinos and the project?
So the idea with them hiring locally is basically the scouts all come from the local areas. So for our next sanctuary, we've recruited scouts from around that area. So that alone, whether or not we then have development projects, that alone is providing people with jobs. There's no other opportunities with jobs. So it's not, money going to the community in that sense, but it's people from the community having jobs and making incomes.
But there wouldn't be a financial revenue, would there? You couldn't pay a conservation fee for entrance into somewhere if it was a long way away from where the tourists were, and you said that was part of the model closer?
Yeah, so that there is a kind of tourism development plan as well to have another lodge further down the Hwange boundary. At the moment, the safari company has 2 lodges in kind of the southeast, and then a lodge all the way to the west. It's probably about a 6-7 hour drive. So having a lodge in the middle, that is an idea. But also just getting tourists to travel that bit further. At the moment, tourists, they go to the kind of more local villages because sometimes it's time consuming, and sometimes. But if we've marketed this project correctly, we're basically saying this is a project where you get to see amazing animals, but you also get to help the people, and getting them to drive an extra hour through the national park or through the villages, we're hoping is going to be, people are going to be willing. So I think it's also how we market it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. If you want to discuss with us about rewilding rhino, we have already done this. I work with Rhino Revolution. We've rewilded orphans that have been raised in an orphanage and other rhinos, and it's not particularly difficult. As long as you've got sufficient grazing and you have good rains, but you might have to supplementary feed for a little while they just orientate themselves. But I don't see that as something that's going to massively handicap what you're going on to do. It's inspiring. It's wonderful work.
Oh, thank you. No, it'd be great to hear your experience as well.
Yeah, will do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for Patricia, and thank you for the Rhino community that participated in the talk tonight. I think we're going to thank Hannah for the fantastic talk, fantastic work, great inspiration that she offers us this time of the year to initiate new projects and work together with communities in conservation, and showing that conservation can really work for communities as well. It's really the kind of thing that we need to see more of as we move along with conservation in Africa. Hannah, thank you very, very much for the talk. We really appreciate it. Please extend our congratulations and our thanks to the whole team there. We really appreciate it. And I think we will keep in touch and see how we can learn from each other.